meeting. They have tried to give this information a few different times in different meetings, that sort of thing, but there's been a lot of questions that people have asked, and so we thought it would be best if the information was presented by the resource person, which is Stephanie Hunter, and she is the business manager. And so who better to have available to explain some of this information but the person that deals with it every day. So we've asked her to come and explain some things that are on the table for negotiations as far as what the board proposed, what DEA came back with as far as a proposal, and then kind of explain our matrix, and then explain how the matrix works for the administration, because their matrix is kind of backwards to how ours is. And then she will be around for questions, for anybody to ask some questions. When we do finish with this portion, any DEA members, we are going to transition to Ms. Stroud's room. We are? If we can.
Okay.
We're stealing your key.
We'll steal your key. Whatever.
No, it's not.
Okay.
For now.
Because we do have to talk about a few things and do a little bit of voting on some stuff. So if you are able to stay for another 20, 30 minutes, that would be wonderful, and we'll move down there for that. With that, I'm going to turn it over to...
Whoops, I have all this stuff. I hope you guys can hear me. Can you guys hear me in the back? Or do you want me to talk louder? Okay, so can you guys hear me now? Okay, perfect. I'm here completely as a resource. It really doesn't matter, just so we're clear on that. As far as where I stand, I'm not paid off of either matrix. Nothing is part of this. It's clearly numbers that are set, and just coming in to explain when I'm sitting there and I'm calculating what everything costs, to kind of tell you what my method is and where those numbers come from. When I start with your guys' matrix where you're at now. I figure out where each of you guys are on that matrix. So I take your FTE number, I put you in on an Excel spreadsheet, and it calculates out to let me know what that base number is for salary. Then from there, I take you guys and I put you over to another Excel spreadsheet that lets me know what all of your benefits are, all the different things that make you different from one another. Do you guys have extracurricular contracts? Do you guys have more days than somebody else? What is those costs? Because they all count into what the total cost is for certified staff. And wherever you're at on the matrix matters when it comes to your extra days and those types of extras that get put onto your regular base salary contract. So I get that information, and then I start breaking that down into a total overall percentage of increase to figure out, one, is there something that's off? Am I seeing that somebody's getting a considerable more or a considerable less amount than someone else that's within their same area? I just really start to dial down every person and every number to make sure that it's all consistent, and if not, there's answers as to why there could be some of those fluctuations. So that's where I start, and then where I go next is I start looking at the same thing on admin side. So theirs is kind of funky, as we all know. Theirs is kind of like a formulation of what everybody has. If I have this schooling or this much in education, and then I add in this much in my service step, and then I take the base, and then I take the flat, and a percentage of their time, it's a huge equation, and each of them equals something different. So I calculate all of that out for them as well. What I do then is I end with a total increase amount for each of them, and I end with what that overall percentage of increase is. The same thing happens for you guys. And your guys's looks like, I have to find it here. Your guys's looks like this. So I've taken out the names, but every single line on here is one of you guys. So when I look and I say, okay, this person who is a BS0, and if they were to get steps and lanes next year, they're going to be a BS1. That transition, here's how much that overall increase would be. And here's what that percentage is. This overall increase in percentage includes any extras, and it includes the pickup for TFFR, that I put a 2% increase on insurance that the district we would have to take up as well. And that goes into that overall percentage because I look at it as a whole. What is it gonna cost us next year in certified? What is it gonna cost us next year in administrators? And what is it gonna cost us next year in classified? What's left after that? And then we start looking at other budgets, like the building budgets and things like that. So that's where you guys are here. What I do then is I take those base numbers, I figure out where everyone's at, then I take the scenarios that I would foresee coming up. 1% on the base, no steps and lanes. Steps and lanes, steps and lane plus 1%, and I start working with the same numbers with those changes. And that's what guides that overall percentage that we talk about, or what an average increase is. That's where it comes from, is these numbers right here. And that's really that whole process of how things play in my world. What I can do now is where I see a huge fluctuation when I look at the two matrices, and what makes it hard in my position to kind of communicate out to both parties. So I'll have the board administrators plus the board negotiators come to me before negotiation starts. Your guys' team came to me, asked the same question, and the board negotiators. How much is there to negotiate with? What do we got? What's going on? So I give you guys a pretty good idea. I offer to meet with each team and say, this is how much we have in our budget. This is what I foresee happening if we do these things. This is how it affects us. And this is where all of that information comes into play with that. So this year, as I've shown, and again, if you guys have any questions, stop me in the middle. I don't mind. It's very informal. Whatever you have a comment even, just throw it out. What I do is I go through and I find out. So if we went with this scenario, this is how much it would cost the district overall for everybody. This is how much we need to have to run our buildings and our electricity. This is how much I think we're going to have in students. So the big problem is this time this year, all of the predictions and recommendations that came out of all the different things that happened in that 1920 year to where they thought we would be, showed that we should have 350 more kids than what we have. That is $3.5 million just from the state. That doesn't go into how much you get back in free and reduced, because as you have more kids, those numbers go up, which means our food costs, we can offset more with that number of kids coming in with free and reduced reimbursements. There's a lot of things that play into that. We get more title dollars when we have more kids that fall into those categories, which then allow us to pay more of our curriculum costs, or more para or teachers. We can throw them under as title teachers or title paras, which helps us offset that general fund money that we're able to negotiate with and do more with overall for our staff. So when we look, and I'm going back and I'm thinking, okay, this year I think I would easily say I'm hoping this year we end with 3801 as our ADM number. So that transitions into a number that the state's going to give us. That number is $4 million overall less than what we anticipated getting. So in 1920, they hired a whole bunch of administrators, a whole bunch of teachers, paras, hoping we were going to have that following 2020 year or 2021 year, 400 more kids that year. So we were ready for that. We were ready to bring in these kids, and we were averaging that almost every year. So that allowed us to go to the negotiating table with much more to negotiate with on both sides, and then pass on as well to classified. Building budgets increased during those years. A lot of things increased. Because we had to take the step back, when we were doing that in the past, we had other pots of money to pull from. So we had other little pools that were sitting out. We'd built up some of our savings accounts. We were able to shift some of those mills. We were able to go out and get general or miscellaneous fund mills. We were able to go get 12. That produced $1.8 million. So we did all of that. We can't go out and get more of that now. And now we see less kids. So in those years where we might have had 100 less kids or something, we could offset it with that. When I'm looking at it, I'm thinking, okay, how do we pay for this, and this? I'm looking at the options that I have available to me. We're not getting what we got in oil royalties. That was a big piece that we used to get a ton of money. We're not seeing what we used to see. You guys will see more of that when you start to pay attention to, if you look at the board reports, you'll look and you'll see the reports that come out showing your self-funded health. Those royalties that used to go in there, that's written into the negotiated agreement for you guys saying this amount will go into there, we're not seeing that. Those oil royalties have dropped off. So that's one factor. The other factor is, again, the enrollment. We're hoping that we'll get 400 more kids. I'm always hoping for that. I'm thinking probably realistically, we're in that 100 kids is what we're overall are going to retain back from what we lost. We're right on the course to do that if we keep up with that enrollment. The other part that affects us is going to be rises in benefits, rises in food, rises in electricity costs, those types of things, because we can't make that stop either. We can't stop it. You can't shut down a building to save electricity. You can't, I just think we can't decide, okay, we're going to serve the same lunch to everybody else, but we're only going to not serve it because we serve the most out of this school, so we're going to cut back on food there to save money. We're bound by federal rules. We're bound by all of those things that really dictate a lot of that too. So those are hard pots to pull from, to be honest. So that's kind of the background information on that. So when we start looking at this, and I was asked this year, can you explain why there's a difference between those two matrices? What is it? What is it? And when we talk about sustainability, what is, in my opinion, and again, it's my opinion, what I look at and say between the two, I see an issue with sustainability if we don't start bringing in more of those huge revenues from the state. That was the other piece. That state that the legislator goes through and they decide we're going to increase that per pupil amount. That used to be 2 to 3% each year. We're looking, this year we got 1% this year. They took out the exact same amount for a STARS rebuild, a program rebuild. So they took it back. So really essentially this year we didn't get an increase from them. Next year we will have a 1% increase. They'll go to legislation next year and we have no idea what that is. The word that we're getting back from legislators in our area that we've been talking to is probably they're going to try to stick to that 1%. So when I looked at revenues for next year and the year after, I put in 1% from the state. I'm figuring that we'll get that. It sounds like we will. Again, that's not a promise, but that's what I'm hoping and figuring on. So I put all that together. Then when I looked at the two salary schedules and I compared also to salary schedules outside of our district to other districts our size, what I noticed the most, and I have two scenarios. So I did, you guys, like I said, I pull out everybody's scenarios. And when I looked at it, this would be what the board's proposal is, which is 1% on the base, no steps and lanes. So this is if nobody saw any movement. It's just a 1% increase on what your step is. That would come out to be 1%. The total increase would be worth 1% for this person who's a BS00 staying on that step. If the board were to give steps and lanes and everybody came to an agreement with nothing on the base, what does that carry out to? What is that overall increase? What's the difference? So the step itself now goes from no step worth to a worth of 2% because we're not putting any money on the base. So that's where that average of what a step is worth comes into play. the districts our size, and I'm talking Mandan, Bismarck, I compared against Jamestown, which they have a one-liner schedule, which is really different. But I asked their business manager to give me what an average was for that step increase overall for their staff. And I took all these increases, and anywhere outside of our district, it's about 0.75 to 1.25 is what a step increase average is. Ours on average right now is 2%. So you see kind of where that goes. So then I look in and I say, okay, maybe the bases are, maybe that's where we make up that difference. Maybe that's where we see a huge difference. On ours, our base seems to be a little bit lower than everywhere else. So I think that might be where we were seeing more of that deficiency in that give or take on why is their step worth so much less, but our bases were so much less than theirs. So that's kind of where that push and that change is when you compare the two. So the thing is when we look at it and we say, what's the number one important thing for everybody? Is it to get credit for your step for the next year that you've been here, or is it an overall percentage? It doesn't matter what step you're on. You just want an increase every year and you want it to be shot at a percentage. That's kind of where you have to look and think, because right now it's 2% is that average. And it differs depending on where you're at on your matrix as well. Same thing with admin. The difference with them is when we look at theirs and we look to see how it goes to them. So this is if the base were to be increased by 1%. That's what they've been offered. 1% on the base, no movement. If we looked at that, this is their overall increase numbers. It comes out to be just like your guys' is right around 1% overall. Your guys' has the same average. Here's where the difference is. If we look at theirs and what their overall step is worth, overall for the average amount, or the average admin, it's worth 0.43 to 0.5. You have these higher numbers in here because here's where theirs plays through. Any money on their base increases their education, and so that education is a big factor, and their career increment is based off of that overall base percentage increase. So when we look on theirs, this person made quite a big career increment change, or not career increment, but their education lane changed. So everybody else on their matrix is getting a 0.5%, but that person is seeing almost, 5.37 just for making that change. Plus, this person in particular, they also are in the first 5 years of their matrix. So on their matrix, that step is worth about 0.75% in the first 5 years to 1%, depending on which one you're on, and then it drops off to 0.5%. So there's a deficiency there in their schedule that shows, okay, why was this? How do you stay sustainable when they're also being told, hey, and encouraged to make career or I guess professional advancements through school when they're asked to take those education classes? You're going to see some huge increases every year to those people. With a career increment with just the service, for them, it comes out to be about anywhere from 2% to 2.5% or 2.3%, depending on where they're at. That's really about where your guys' is, which I found kind of funny as well, because when we look at those career increments and every other year receiving one, when you're at a 2.11, just average, you figure for 2 years you're down to like a 1.1% as what your overall is if you break it down that way, which your peers are getting 2%. So I don't know how that all came to play either, but those are some things that I've asked lots of questions to as many people as I can to kind of get some input, because I also don't want to recommend things to the board or to anybody without understanding how it affects you guys and it affects long term, because all of these things that are done have long-term implications, and that's really the main reason I wanted to really find out what is the difference between these, how do we stack up against other districts. The other districts, when it comes to their admin schedules, they are much more consistent when it comes to a certain amount, a flat amount or a flat percentage with their education numbers. You don't see such a huge swing as ours does. Those are really large increases that carry through on ours. Instead, on an admin and other districts our size, it's more of a flat amount. So that changes that as well. That's something that I've recommended. Maybe they look into. I don't know. That's up to them to do. But that's kind of where I see that. So when I get asked, I've been asked numerous times, well, why are the admin being asked to change what the steps are, or like their schedule when it comes to that, and why would they be offered steps and lanes when we wouldn't? It's because of that difference in what that step overall, that percentage of increase. Your guys' increase comes from your step, not really the base. And theirs comes from the base and not really the step. So that's that difference. And in other districts, their base is worth more, but that step is more consistent with that 1%. So that's a given. Okay, everyone can get steps and lanes. Now we're going to start dealing with the base or things like that, instead of trying to figure out how do you give an overall 2% increase to everybody and then start working off the other, what's left. So that's kind of, in my opinion, where those things are different. The other thing that I was going to go over really quickly was the difference in what you guys have all been offered. Because you guys all are affected differently on each of your schedules, it's the same for admin, I ran the same numbers for them. When we look at the proposals that are on the table, I did this, and the way that this looks is, I will show you. So this is an example, and I threw in here what it is. So you have the board's proposal, which is 1% on the base. What would that be for somebody who's going from a year 17 to 18, so they're not getting a career increment? What would that look like for the different scenarios? So this is just a person, if you were doing that, you would get your overall increase would be 70801 on 1% on the base. That's the board's number. Here's what the certified have given to the board right now, what was on the table of 1% taken away from, well, shifted. It's not taken away. You guys still get the 1%. You're just picking it up instead of the district on TFFR. So for this person in particular, they would see $685.60 less in their take-home check. That's how it would affect them. If you guys came up with a different idea, one of the other options, if the admin doesn't agree to it, which I don't know if they will or won't, but if they do, then great. If they don't, then I wanted to have this as an option to show you guys too, so everyone kind of understands how it would affect you, is for that piece, if you found out a different option, like the insurance was another option that was thrown out. If you went from the 80-20 split down to a 75-25 split, then that would pay for your steps and lanes and you don't give up TFFR. So how would that affect this person if that was the option? So for this person, because they're in a non-increment year, it doesn't really affect them. Just when we're looking at that base amount. So the next person that I took would be somebody who's brand new teacher, brand new on the matrix. When we look at that, here's what their current salary would be here at this top box. Here's what it would be for their take home if the board gave, if you guys agreed on the 1%, the board, here's how it would affect this person. Here's how that 1% on TFFR affects this person. And here is if another option were chosen, they still get that step movement. but they've not had to give up TFFR. So their take home is not affected. How does that translate? And then I took somebody who was on the bottom of the scale, or kind of in the middle. So I took somebody who was a 15, I believe, year. Or no, this is a person who is up for a career increment. So this is somebody on the matrix who's up for a career increment this year. So they didn't get that increase other than the 1% on the base last year. They're up this year for that career increment amount. How does this affect them? So they would get this with the 1% increase on the base. Same thing here. If they gave up 1% TFFR, how does that affect them? And then if they didn't give up the 1% TFFR and you went with a different option, how does that step and lane affect that person? So it kind of shows you that it affects everybody sort of in different ways depending on where you're at on the matrix. I have everybody's personal numbers too. So if you want, I'm going to stick around and you have questions or you want to see you personally, how any of these options will affect you. I don't mind running you numbers, putting them in there, whatever you guys want, or send me an email, whatever works for you. And then I guess I'll just go quickly. We already went through the TFFR, what that would look like. That's one of the proposals in order to save the money to get that step and lane movement. So to me, it's a number that we're trying to hit. It's about 300,000, 306,000 that the board needs to stay within to not go over what we have in that extra amount in our ending fund balance. So right now, this year, they have about $500,000 in their ending fund balance extra that we have accrued from savings over on these ESSER dollars. When we look at that, it's not something that sustains long term, but it at least buys another year to see what our enrollment does and to see what the state legislator does for the next 2 years. So it buys them that time to have to figure out, is this a long-term decision we need to make further because we're not going to see these huge increases, or are we? That's kind of what that does. So when we look at 500,000, that is a total overall out the door. It's tough because you're splitting it amongst lots of different options and places, and what's part of that $500,000 too is that extra increase on enrollment that we saw this year. It also plays into that amount. So when you guys see this is that extra amount we're getting from the state, this is how it's going to translate, that's part of those dollars. So right now, if you look at those dollars, if we take 500,000 as that spot we're trying to stay in and we split it between all three groups, you guys are coming in at about 306, admin's coming in about 37,000, and classified right now to keep within what your guys is, what the board has offered would be around 111,000. So that's kind of where that stays. Anything above that, it's kind of what the board has said is it's kind of up to the parties. If you don't like a way that they've said, hey, this might pay for steps and lanes. I think they threw out time on your days or something like that, like the extra 15 minutes to your day plus a 15-minute at lunch was my understanding as their option to maybe get steps and lanes for cost savings. That's an option that would get you guys to that bottom line, or the other option was the health insurance, and we talked about that, what that shift would look like. That again affects everybody differently because you guys all have different health insurance plans. So some person who has a family plan, they're going to get hit a lot harder than somebody who has a single plan. That would be the reality of that decision. There's a lot of things that are put on everybody's shoulders in this room to kind of figure out, and I'm sorry is what I can say. I wish that it was a different situation. Any questions? Any comment? I mean, yeah.
I have a question
Yeah.
about the matrix, because I don't know.
Okay.
You don't want to leak up.
Okay.
Our matrix, once we hit year 15, we're out on the steps and lanes.
Correct.
Fun part.
Yeah.
Which means if we're down there every other year, we'll get something.
Yeah.
And if it's not our year and nothing's put on the base, we get nothing.
Yeah.
And we get hit 1,000 ways.
Yeah.
That's ours. When you look at the administrators, do the administrators just keep getting to add their years of experience and all their education, or do they hit a?
So there's bottoms out at 15 and then they start with career increments just like you guys do. Yes. So
They do it every other?
every other year, same thing. It starts on the same year as your guys' is at 15. It starts every 2 years. It's 5% of the base, just like your guys' is. Their base is considerably higher, so that amount will be higher. That's what I know about that.
That's what I didn't know.
Yeah.
I didn't know they.
Yep, they bottom out. Yep, and then they go into career increment. So those people you saw that had those 2%, that's where they're in their career increment year. There's somebody on there that's not in a career increment year, and theirs was like a 0.01 because they have the health insurance. So, yeah.
How the extending the day and taking 15 minutes from our lunch, how does that equate to cost savings?
Okay, so right now we have open para positions in the district. They're open, not filled. We also have paras that will kind of, they say they're going to stay and then they end up not staying. So next year we start hiring back those paras. We wouldn't hire those positions back if we didn't need them in those buildings, because the paras that we have existing, they would transition them in to do different things during those periods, is my understanding of what that is. I calculated out what para cost, and they took that to board administrators and they came up with that scenario, and that's my understanding of how you transition that. It's not getting rid of paras, I was assured, because that was my question of how are you seeing these savings? We're not getting rid of paras whatsoever. We're not going to fill open positions right now, and we're not going to rehire if we don't need to in the fall, depending on how many were to leave. We would keep our para numbers where they're at right now. So that was my answer to that, is what I got. Any other questions? And I'm going to stick around too if you guys just want to come up, whatever.
That works.
That's it. Thank you guys so much for listening and being willing to walk through it with me. I appreciate it very much. Thank you to the DA for letting me hijack your guys' beginning of your meeting. I appreciate it very much. I appreciate that. Thank you guys.
Thank you very much for coming.
Yeah, no problem.
So those DEA people that would like to stay